I'll go back now to the beginning of my story. So once I had my diagnosis, and I want to talk to you about my education. So it was local government policy that if you went to a special school, and you could go to a special school outside of the area that you lived in, that if you had to travel by car, that you would do that with an escort in the back, somebody to accompany you, an adult. As it was in the early days, when between the ages of 2 years old and 5, I travelled an hour to school every day and an hour back. And Mum and Dad, they had my 2 brothers at home. My dad was a policeman. My mum was a full-time mum, but also a dressmaker. The 2 of them would take it in turns to be the escort in the back of the taxi, taking me and other disabled children to this school in Chertsey. It was really interesting because regardless of the aptitude of the disabled person, the level of their intelligence, because they were disabled, we were all bunched together. And so that was my experience, even at the next school after that, when I went to a school that was much nearer to my home. But even then, we were in a classroom, all of us together, and it was called the PH unit. PH stood for physically handicapped. Now think about that. Again, medical model, social policy even. It was a policy of that school and the education authority to have segregated learning for disabled people. We were all together in that classroom. And I remember saying to my teacher, I was 8 at the time, when are we going to do some proper maths and English? And she said to me, well, the problem is, some of you might be dead next week. And I still remember that to this day, her remark. And that got me thinking. It was certainly an explanation as to why we would be growing cress on the windowsill or making pots of jam. Because the learning was about life skills. It was about experiences. It was about having fun. And it was about therapeutic occupation, not about academic learning. Again, medical model. But here's an example of a positive social policy change, begun by the Labour government because they commissioned the report in the late 70s, and then, in fairness to the Thatcher government, they implemented those recommendations by Lady Warnock in 1981. And the idea was that disabled people should be integrated into mainstream education, that those children who were able to, and that was all of them, to be honest, the principle was that disabled people should be integrated into mainstream education. And so when the teacher that told me about disabled people being dead next week retired, in came another teacher called Mrs. Yarwood. Out went the desks, out went the bed in the corner, because there was a bed in the corner of our classroom, and we would all take turns in the break at lunchtime to decide whose turn it was to throw a sickie that afternoon, so that each of us could have a lie down in the afternoon. But the bed disappeared, and Mrs. Yarwood, she taught English and maths and proper academic subjects. And this was all to the aim of eventually me being effectively thrown out of the class and becoming, within that same school setting, the only disabled person in a class with non-disabled children. Now, I was still taken out of that class for physiotherapy once a week, for swimming on Mondays, and for horse riding on Fridays. But I was in a class with lots of other disabled people, all of us together.